Over my career, I first heard about the greenhouse effect back in 1977. And I kept saying to myself, that's going to be a problem someday. Somebody ought to do something about that.
August 6, 1945, the world's first deployed atomic bomb, Little Boy, was detonated over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, instantly vaporizing over 80,000 people. 3 days later, a second A-bomb, Fat Man, was detonated over Nagasaki, killing an estimated 40,000 people. The two Japanese cities were leveled in seconds, over 300,000 innocent civilians were killed, and the island nation was left decimated, plagued by deadly, poisonous radioactivity. Up to that point in history, nobody had ever seen a weapon so powerful and catastrophic, a weapon capable of such mass destruction. The weapon to end all wars, all debates, and potentially humanity's at stake. A weapon so powerful and catastrophic that it radiated fear, impacted all foreign policy, and had no casual use other than complete and utter annihilation. The genie was out of the bottle, and the fear of a world plagued by deadly radioactive fallout not only evoked mass pandemonium, but cast a dark shadow of fear over nuclear energy. The Cold War had started, and there is no going back. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, leaders of the U.S. and the Soviet Union engaged in a tense 13-day military standoff over the installation of Soviet missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the U.S. coastline. In an emotional TV address, President John F. Kennedy notified Americans about the impending threat, communicating his decision to enact a naval blockade around Cuba and making it clear the U.S. was prepared to use excessive nuclear force if necessary.
Shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Following this international crisis, many people feared the world was on the brink of an all-out nuclear war. The doomsday clock stood less than a minute away from midnight. DEFCON 2 was in full effect, and mutually assured destruction seemed imminent as the world hung on the brink of an uncontrollable nuclear holocaust.
Everybody's got a nuke in their pocket. One spark would set it off.
Americans were petrified, frozen in fear, as the Russians could strike at any time without warning. It was a war between governments, and people realized that what happened in Japan could happen anywhere. A nuke could drop with less than 3 minutes warning, and if you weren't killed from searing heat, flying debris, or the impending shockwave, you could still easily succumb to deadly amounts of poisonous radiation.
Mutually assured destruction was called MAD for a reason, because a lot of people thought it was mad. Some people believed that if we could guarantee we'd wipe each other off the face of the earth, that nobody would do anything.
People were scared, plagued by constant and unbearable fear that the world could end in any moment. Submarines, missiles, and bombers armed with nuclear warheads patrolled the sea, land, and air 24/7, and the government promoted immense civil defense propaganda.
Dum-dum, diddle-dum-dum, diddle-dum-dum, diddle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and cover, ducked and cover.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
and you
and you and you.
duck and cover.
Kids in schools performed duck and cover drills on a weekly basis, and civilians were not only encouraged to educate themselves on the deadly effects of radiation, but they were also prompted to build bomb shelters.
I was a student in grade school, very young, and one of the things we had to do was all of us had to go down in the basement of the school, turn out the lights and huddle there, expecting at any minute the Russian planes would come over and bomb us. The other thing we had to do is we had exercises during the week where we'd have to hide under our desks in case of the attacks, which was, now you look back and it's kind of ridiculous knowing what radiation can do to you. But that's one of the things that all these youngsters, myself, were scared. Our parents were scared, we were scared. And one of the things we also had to do is that we had, as youngsters, we had to have our blood type tested in the schools. And I had a little card that had my blood type on it. And we were very frightened. It was a scary time to be growing up that way.
At one point, the United States possessed over 30,000 nukes, enough to blow up the entire world, 20 times over. But by the end of the 60s, the fear of anything nuclear ran so deep that the impending threat of nuclear war receded, and with the atmospheric test ban eliminating the risk of fallout, nuclear power fell into the crosshairs of public controversy. Throughout the 70s and 80s, the media publicized catastrophic reactor accidents such as 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl to not only invoke unparalleled fear, but to expose corporate greed and the immediate dangers linked to nuclear energy. The 3 Mile Island meltdown, caused by human error and a complete disregard of safety regulation, shattered the credibility of the industry and destroyed the public perception surrounding nuclear energy.
The potential is there for the ultimate risk of a meltdown at the 3 Mile Island atomic power plant outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
In the worst case, a massive amount of radioactive material would be spewed into an area 5 to 10 miles in diameter and 20 miles downwind.
The corrupt power companies were exposed for cutting corners, lying to the media, and putting Americans at risk of radiation exposure, causing controversial public reactions and casting a shadow of fear over the atomic power industry.
Nuclear power is dead as an industry in the United States. It died at 3 Mile Island.
As nuclear skepticism continued to bubble throughout the 80s, the Chernobyl disaster in 1986 sent a radioactive plume of fear across the atomic world. Classified as level 7, the highest level on the International Nuclear Event Scale, Chernobyl is considered the most disastrous power plant accident in history, releasing over 400 times more radiation than the bombing of Hiroshima. Claims of radiation causing mutation, contortion, and death invoked a large fear response, and other false claims of mass graves, mutated women and children, and over 400,000 dead were headlining newspapers across the United States. People are shocked. Paralyzed in fears, nuclear energy became a subject of immense controversy, and an unparalleled fear of radiation was born.
And Chernobyl is just a huger example, a much bigger example of how right people are when they say this stuff's dangerous.
Now 2017, the doomsday clock still ticks day by day as the impending threat of nuclear war progresses in the South Pacific. When looking at recent history, the atomic bomb is a display of strength and power, a monster made by man. After shattering a nation, killing over 300,000 innocent civilians, and plaguing the island nation of Japan with radioactive fallout, the A-bomb truly represents fear itself. For decades, people all around the world lived in fear of poisonous radioactivity, nuclear power, and the possibility of complete and utter annihilation. However, now more than ever, international tensions are rising, and the fate of humanity could potentially hang in the balance. Last month, Trump mobilized the USS Carl Vinson to the South Pacific in a stern response to a North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile test. Though the ICBM failed, the long-range ballistic missiles, designed to reach the U.S. mainland, were still an immense showcase of strength, representing a potential nuclear attack.
The real fear is that North Korea is getting closer to having a missile that could reach
the mainland United States,
and the west coast of the United States,
Hawaii, Alaska.
Following the test, North Korea stated that it would continue nuclear weapons testing despite multiple warnings from the U.S., Russia, and China. With North Korea's development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles that can potentially hit UN allies, people are on high alert, frightened by the slightest notion of nuclear war.
Our republic is in total crisis. Every top expert out there globally says the world is at the greatest danger ever, worse than the Cuban Missile Crisis, of nuclear war, ladies and gentlemen.
The North Korea cannot successfully hit the U.S. with a nuclear strike. They've been developing an ICBM program for more than a decade, using nuclear deterrence and the fear of total annihilation as a bargaining tool. Just the remote threat of nuclear war has caused mass global uproar, forcing the U.S. and other world powers into a position of weakness and negotiation as the doomsday clock looms dangerously close to midnight. However, though the prevalent threat of nuclear war still exists today, should North Korea's nuclear ambitions really be our most prevalent fear? Or the fact that we release over 38 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere each year, and we're on the brink of an uncontrollable mass extinction?
Over my career, I'd first heard about the greenhouse effect back in 1977. And I kept saying to myself, that's going to be a problem someday. Somebody ought to do something about that.
When I went down to the southwest with PLP, I was shocked to see the devastating effects of climate change and the severe impacts caused by Las Vegas's consumer-driven economy. Standing on top of the 726-foot Hoover Dam, I was astounded to learn that the once abundant Lake Mead currently sits 140 feet lower than it did back in the 80s, exposing underwater mountains and a large white ring around the perimeter of the lake. In Arizona, known as the Sunny State, I was also blown away to learn that coal power makes up over 95% of the total energy produced.
We need to stop using coal-fired plants because they pollute the atmosphere, and a lot of people, both old people and younger people, are developing asthma. In Arizona, with all the sun we have, solar should be the rule rather than the exception. In Pima County this weekend, we also had an air quality advisory, and so that means the air is not as good as it used to be. So Arizona is beautiful. I want to keep the water and the air clean. So I am pro-solar, and I wish everyone else would be.
You would think a state that receives over 299 days of sun and only 11 inches of rain per year would invest a little more than 5% of their budget into renewable solar energy. Disgusted by this, I came to the self-realization that I don't support a society filled by corporate greed and fear, where only the rich get richer and the rest of us are left to suffer the consequences. To mimic the words of Thomas Dyer, the Nevada State Museum director, I support a society where we all strive and succeed together.
You know, I'm not against capitalism, but I am for, you know, a rounded effort to bring us all up, you know, not just a few, be a very, very privileged few, and, you know, screw the rest.
For me, my children, my children's children, and all of humanity, I want to ensure a clean planet and life for future generations to come, and I honestly believe nuclear energy will be the key to a successful future. With the increasing threat of climate change and the diminishing fossil fuels, we must once again ask ourselves a critical question. Is it time to start thinking about other controversial alternatives, despite the immediate dangers linked to nuclear energy? Throughout the Cold War, the fear of radioactivity and the policy of mutually assured destruction not only invoked mass pandemonium, but cast a dark shadow of fear over the concept of nuclear energy. However, now more than ever, with the increasing threat of climate change, nuclear energy may be detrimental to the successful development of the future. In my opinion, I believe that the fear and stigma surrounding nuclear energy is relevant, yet irrational and based off of selective evidence. When we think about nuclear energy, many of us automatically associate atomic bombs, catastrophic nuclear accidents, or the deadly prospect of radiation exposure. But in reality, nuclear energy is one of the safest and cleanest sources of sustainable energy. Right now, people claim that we're in the midst of a clean energy revolution, but I say we're hurtling towards a clean energy crisis. Renewable energy sources like wind and solar power are good alternatives, but they only provide sufficient power up to 10 to 20% of the time, which means that if the sun's not shining or if the wind's not blowing, you still need power for your schools, hospitals, factories, and homes. Nuclear power plants generate electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, while emitting less carbon dioxide than solar.
I personally think nuclear energy is something we're going to have to really examine and look at. If you look at the waste stream from nuclear energy, it's actually less than a lot of the waste streams from other power sources out there. Power needs to be a 24/7 thing. If you look at how the grid works, our biggest power usage is from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., pretty much nationwide. And solar and wind can add, but you can't, you know, pull the cord and say, hey God, make it blow a little faster, we need more energy here. So you're going to need a very constant source of energy. When you look at the energy use we have, yes, we've done things to make things much more efficient, but just like the instruments we have, your cell phone, your computer, we have many more devices now that take power. So we actually have a lot of little phantom power things going on and things happening that do that. So I can see the need for nuclear power to come into play to give us reliable power 24/7. I would also like to see us use ways to reduce the overall hazardous waste. When you look at a spent rod is 85% recoverable. If we would do the things to recover that material, we would only be burying 15% of a radioactive rod. In other words, we could reprocess a lot of this stuff and not be burying large amounts of radioactive materials.
However, with all these astounding benefits to nuclear power, the major problem is that only 28% of people approve of it.
Nuclear energy seems like a really great idea. In theory, it is, you know. You can get a lot of power for, you know, for very minimal effort here, but it's just, you know, another nail in the coffin of credibility, of us being able to perform, to implement it safely and without, destroying ourselves, our Earth.
Everybody is afraid of nuclear accidents such as 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and Chernobyl, but if you look at previous data, the actual biological risk of nuclear radiation is much smaller than most people realize. In total, only 56 deaths out of the supposed 400,000 can be directly linked to the Chernobyl disaster. In contrast, air pollution kills over 7 million people a year.
Despite what people think, it's hard to figure out how to make nuclear power much safer. I mean, every medical journal that looks at it, this is the most recent study from the British journal Lancet, one of the most respected journals in the world, nuclear is the safest way to make reliable power. Everybody's scared of the accident. So you go look at the accident data, Fukushima, Chernobyl, World Health Organization finds the same thing. The vast majority of harm is caused by people panicking. And they're panicking because they're afraid. In other words, the harm that's caused isn't actually caused by the machines or the radiation. It's caused by our fears.
So it's evident that the vast majority of fear surrounding nuclear energy stems from negative media bias and controversial public reactions, not necessarily the deadly effects of radiation. When talking about modern technology, nuclear energy is making leaps and bounds in the realms of both safety and sustainability. In the past decade, both the reliability and efficiency of nuclear power plants have reached record levels, and scientists are currently in the process of developing a reactor that runs solely on nuclear waste.
There's a reactor that's coming online now. They're starting to sell it. It's a high-temperature gas reactor. It can't melt down, but it's really big and bulky. That's part of the safety, and nobody thinks it's going to ever get cheaper than the reactors that we have.
Today, nuclear energy generates 1/5 of the electrical output in the United States. However, the world demand for energy is projected to rise by about 50% by 2030 and to nearly double by 2050. So clearly, with the increasing threat of climate change knocking on the door, the time seems right to reconsider the prospect of nuclear energy and the future of humanity.